Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite book villains. I even have my lovely evil queen crown that I have just laying around. Figured it would be on point with this. So villains can be very dynamic. I know in a lot more recent book releases, the villains have become a lot more pivotal to the story, or they change, they become a love interest, opposed to just the bad guy being the bad guy for bad guy reasons. There's been a lot of different added layers of depth and a lot of different character development that happens within these stories, and I really like that. So I have a list of a couple different books of who some of my favorite villain stories come from. I'm going to try my best not to get into spoilers, so there's a couple of these where I can't super get into detail about why I like the villain. If you want more of a spoilery kind of thing, then I can do that for sure. Any excuse to put this tiara back on. Without further ado, the first one that I can't go into like any detail, but if you've read this series, you know exactly who this is. The villain of the Red Queen series. There are a couple of villains within this series. One of the major ones you see immediately, and that is the Queen. And she is just that perfect evil queen, all those vibes, 1010%. But then we have our other villain, who has so much more depth and is a villain not for villain's sake. He's a villain for he has his own agenda, and I love that about his character. It's super fun to read through. We even get a couple of his point of views, which are always just really intriguing to follow. Up next is The Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Mansicalco. We have Wrath, who is our villain. And in this story, we're following a girl who's trying to solve her sister's murder and accidentally summons one of the sins. And she summons Wrath and ends up binding this villain to her by mistake. And our story just kind of goes on from there. He's a villain in the sense that he is a personification of one of the 7 deadly sins, and watching that dynamic of the fact that he's a villain in his own right, but not necessarily the villain of this story. And I thought that was a really unique angle to take on a character. And I love Wrath. Wrath is one of my favorite characters that I've read this year. And I am just, in the next book, we're going to be in Wrath's domain. And I just can't wait to actually see him very similar to when you see Rhysand in The Court of Nightmares. You see him in his own element as to how he's actually personified within his own world. And you get to see how he is the villain of his own world, and I'm super pumped to see that unravel. Up next, we have Bonecryer's Moon by Kathryn Purdie. Now, with this one, there's not necessarily a set villain. And in this one, these two are like each other's villains. They're arch enemies and don't really know it until they meet. So in Bonecryer's Moon, we have these Bonecryers, which are these women who help keep the dead. They usher them into the gates of either heaven or hell within this world, but no one really knows that they exist. They're really just a myth. But one of the things a Bonecryer has to do in order to gain her power over the dead is kill her soulmate. So when our main character calls forth her soulmate, who this guy had watched his father get killed by a Bonecryer and has it out for them, and his whole goal is to find one and kill her. So when he's called forth by a Bonecryer as the soulmate, they both are trying to kill each other. And I loved that dynamic, because you watch it go from this weird enemies, and then they get to know each other, and they're still enemies, but they're trying to grapple with the choices that they've made and the choices that they need to make for our main girl. It's to gain this power to fulfill her destiny that she believes she has. For him, it's to avenge his father, and you see that the villainishness, I can't words, from each other's perspective, and that's so just fun to follow. I love this book. It was one of my favorite books of last year. Up next, I have Fallen Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. Now, this is a long series, and what I loved about the villains of this series is there was more than one. We had several villains, and a lot of it was growing because our world was growing, the magic was growing. Everything was evolving, including the villains. We went from a, neighboring kingdom trying to conquer one of our main characters' kingdoms. We had the son of that conqueror, and it sort of evolves from there, and I loved that evolution. It was seamless. It was just intriguing. We have different types of villains. Like I said, we had that conqueror. We have a godly villain later on. And just seeing their different motivations and why they're villains. Sometimes they don't even, the Conqueror didn't even see himself as a villain. He saw himself as, expanding his territory, doing what's best for his people, because their land was dying and this other land was fruitful. We have these enemies from across the sea, because this takes place on an island, and eventually we go across the sea, and we have more enemies over there, because this island is one of the only ones with magic. There are so many different angles, and I loved, and it was, for a fantasy, it was very realistic that you had enemies on so many different fronts, and it was really, really unique, and I haven't seen a ton of different things like this. I haven't seen a ton of different books that have that set, just enemies who aren't necessarily working together. That I think was the best part, is you see these, if a villain has an army or anything, they can attack the heroes on several different fronts, but they're all working together. These villains, they had nothing to do with each other. They weren't working together. They had their own justifications, their own end goals. And, there were even talks of, ganging up on the heroes. And they were like, nah, you're evil. And they're like, but you're evil. And it's like, yeah, but we're on different levels. And those conversations were really fun and created a really, really dynamic world. Up next, I have the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. This one is, because this is a Cinderella retelling in space, we have the Evil Queen. This was just such a unique twist on all of these stories, that following this main villain, our evil queen, was so much fun. It had that perfect just, I'm evil. They gave her justification. She gave her own book, which I believe is Fairest, and you just get her perspective as to why she is the way she is, and it just created that perfect princess versus villain story, and I loved it. This one is just top-notch, one of my favorite series, one of my favorite retellings ever written, and highly recommend this if you're a big Disney or Disney princess fan. Up next, I have the Shatter Me series by Tahereh Mafi. This one, there are two main villains. One of them switches sides, and if you've read the Shatter Me series, you know exactly who I'm talking about, and I love that character. He is one of my favorite book guys that I've ever read about. He has so much depth to him, so many different layers, and watching his character development over the 9,000 books that this series has, and there's going to be a new one coming out later this year, as we just learned, and just watching him go through that growth and character development was so satisfying to watch. I loved every second of it. So Shatter Me, you're following this girl who has been incarcerated for a few years because her touch kills. Think Rogue from X-Men. So she's finally let go by this villain, starts to get trained for this army, and she wants nothing to do with that. She wants nothing to do with her powers. She wants nothing to do with the villain. She just wants to be free and live her life. So I really enjoyed the Shatter Me series. I know it's a hot or cold type of book, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. It was a relatively good dystopian, considering this came out right when the big dystopian book drop happened. But it was just really fun. Next, I have another Marissa Meyer book. I have the Renegades series by Marissa Meyer. Now, with this one, I really liked it because we're following two perspectives. We are following a superhero in training, who is Adrian, and a supervillain, Nova, who is trying to infiltrate the superheroes' training area to try and bring them down. Now, Nova, since she is one of our main characters, you get her perspective, and I love that. So, and you even get to see when she goes to these other big supervillain hideout, you get all the other villains, you get their backstories, and it's just a really good superhero versus supervillain story. But I just love that you get more of the depth of the supervillain. They're not villains because of, you know, a serum made them bad, typical supervillain things. They have legitimate reasons as to why they're rebelling and why they are the way they are. Some of them are just straight up villains like that, and I love the diversity within this story of the different types of heroes and villains that we get. The next book that I have is the Illuminae Files by Amie Kaufman and J. Kristoff, specifically book 1. So in this one, we are following an escape ship after a planet is attacked by this terrorist union. And while they're on the ship, this disease runs rampant, and then the AI sort of goes insane. So our main villain is Aiden within this book, who is the AI, and it's very much like the early 2000s Will Smith movie I, Robot, where he thinks he's doing it for the betterment of humanity. He thinks he's following his orders, but in reality, he's just murdering everybody. So we're following Katie and Ezra as they're trying to deal with this disease that's also happening on the ship, while also trying not to get murdered by the AI. And it's really intriguing. The one thing that I love about Illuminae is it's not told in a simple novel format. We have these different data files, like text messages. There's different files within it, and that's how the story is told. And I loved it. It was so unique of an experience, and I would just highly recommend it. Like, we even get some stuff from Aiden. I just really loved this series. There's different villains within each book, but the story does follow a singular plot line with a major villain at the core of it. But this one, Aiden, very lawful evil, and that's one of the most like worst villains typecasting that there is, and it's also just the most interesting to follow. And for lawful evil, the best example I can come up for lawful evil besides Aiden would be Dolores Umbridge from the Harry Potter series. She is the epitome of lawful evil. So those are some of my just favorite villains within a series. All different types of villains, different types of dynamics, different types of backstories. And I love a good villain. I'll root for a good villain if they're written well. And these ones are written so well. I love these books. These are some of my favorites that I would always recommend. So if you're interested in a good villain story, I would highly recommend any of these books. Feel free to let me know down below in the comments some of your favorite villains within books. I would love recommendations. And then please like and comment, subscribe to our channel. We post videos every Tuesday and Thursday with the occasional Sunday. And I will see you guys in our next video. Bye!